Chapter 1. The caravan turned out to be a loud word for 4 wagons loaded under a bag. After receiving the fare, I was asked to choose a place and a seat in the van, if any. Contrary to my expectations, the wagons were filled with large, longhorned buffaloes, not plates. The buffaloes were almost black, lumpy, bite and extremely phlegmatic. The canyon along the road was of much greater interest to them than the tracks themselves. They moved measured, without straining the dark gray shiny sides. The construction of the carriage envisaged a folding at the level of the animal's chest, where the vessels were attached with bags with board of vegetable mass, water and dark seed. So the buffaloes ate on the move and could walk without stopping all day long. The road to Sarkana took a local week, that is, 12 days. By the end of the first day, I was seriously wondering why I didn't sit in the capital. The second day I spent on my feet, most of the time moving my pants in front of the caravan, so that the pop didn't square from the endless seat. There was nothing to complain about, the air smelled sweet and dull. This is if you go in front of the caravan, and not from behind, where it smells of fresh rural life. The stone road was quickly removed from the snow and was almost dry, and from a long quick walk the thoughts gained clarity. The first clarity I found was that I don't have a deadline anymore. I'm used to thinking in before and after categories. If I originally planned to return from my trip by the end of spring, then now I am absolutely free, and spend even a dozen days on a pleasant road is no longer an unacceptable luxury, but my time to discover this world. The second clarity was that my location probably doesn't matter. The alien which can be located both in the center of the capital and in Fuego Kievo, on the edge of geography. It's possible I'm approaching her right now. The third and most important insight was that my resources are not renewable. At the moment, I have a lot of food, but I have never eaten dry baking and I can hardly say how much of this stock is enough. In my senses, for a month, not less, but it's not exactly. I could make money in my world by singing. Here the audience also had my performance to taste. You can even score for exoticity, yet I have a beautiful instrument and songs are unusual, but immediately a minus, because few people can understand me. It would be logical to try to keep all your reserves, including cash, and somehow to earn a living and nights by singing. The 4 men in the caravan were obviously missing. I decided to do an experiment. I got in the first van, and I kicked the guitar. And then I played a little, I sang a little. My creatures became alive, and even the animals began to move more joyfully.
Yeah,
You sing beautifully, but it's not up to us. I thought the barbarians were talking in general, and it was that. The youngest of my companions came first in touch, a whirling big man with a broken nose and rough mossy hands. With his sleeves fastened to the elbow and a rich headband tied with a dark ribbon across his forehead, he resembled a hero. His name was Razum. It is not barbaric, but the language of the place where I was born, I replied. My companions were speechless, but markedly disconnected, began to joke and even made bets on which buffalo would empty first. Apparently, this is a well-known road fun. At first, I did not appreciate the intellectual potential of this class, but by the third day I was quite engaged and also made bets. The wagons talked about their own. I often listened to their conversations in an attempt to extract useful information. The circle of interests we had coincided only in the question of the cost of a night in taverns. In this area, 5 bears per room and 3 for food, closer to the southern capital, the total amounts to 15. My companions generally preferred to spend the night in the open sky, but the rain in the spring was frequent, so we had to stay under the roof. In addition, closer to Sarkana and lazy people at night do not sleep. In the courtyard the goods will be safe. I have a lot of free time for reflection. The thought of killing 3 people was trying to get away from me. Did I have a choice? However, my heart was deaf of how quickly I was turning into a ruthless monster. First I struck Renara with a pin, then I killed 3 of them with magic. It is not surprising that such a bride was not to the Emperor's taste. How quickly the nanoparticles of civilization flew from me. Freely or unwillingly, I was constantly returning to Renar in my thoughts. His betrayal caused pain and grief, but there was no anger. I subconsciously continued to seek an excuse for his actions. Intuition suggested that, despite his sharpness and flamboyantness, he was a good person, and his subtlety was not inherent. People like him don't kill with other people's hands or put a knife in their backs. I was accustomed to believing, so I suffered between the inconsistency of facts and feelings. No matter how hard I tried to cultivate hatred for my ex-brother-in-law, there was only a bitter insult. It was a little embarrassing that my family had been cured, and I turned out to have picked up food, things, money and disappeared without fulfilling my obligations. Because of that, it was, of course, uncomfortable and heavy on the soul. The first rain, as was promised, did not wait long, charged the next day, but with what strength? I was sitting under the hood in one of the carts wrapped in my coat, cardigan, sweater and ovenisa. The clothes dried away quickly, and the cold was incredibly cold, which was facilitated by the shaky wind. By the evening, I had no tooth on tooth, so the approaching tavern I rejoiced like a native. It was warm inside and it smelled like food, so I sat closer to the fireplace to warm up. The spacious room was located on the ground floor of a good wooden two-story house. The walls were covered with wooden panels and partially decorated with paintings. The ornament was simple and a little naive, but it did not spoil the overall impression, on the contrary, added comfort. The darkness was thickening in the street, and the sky had not yet darkened completely when the door quietly opened, and a boy's voice was heard. "Sorry, let the orphan warm up." "Go out, beggar." "Oh, for me, these spies, all the clients are daring, but I don't let them." The old aunt behind the counter herself looked like she was allowed everywhere, but most often to the table. I felt sorry for the boy, and in obedience to the impulse, I went up to the porch. To the wall appeared a weakening boy, clothed not even in a hoodie, but in some clothes, which were never even a garment. On the face are the scratches, the legs bare and in wounds, and the look of the affected beast. "Hi." The question, of course, is stupid, but contact needs to be established from something. The boy looked down, he looked like he was 14 years old, he grew like me, his eyes were huge, and they looked appreciatively. They say that spyless people are excellent psychologists and one kind of person is able to determine the danger emanating from him. Life is a tough teacher. Let's say I want to. Will you feed? I'm not Sam, I'm served here. And what do you want for that? Is there anything I might need from you? The boy shaken and sneezed. Can we have 2 hot dinners, please? I put 6 honeycombs in front of my aunt, and she pressed her lips like the money was suddenly winning. She literally poured our food on the table, splashing half the soup out of one of the bowl. How long have you eaten? Yesterday. What did you eat? Carrot. Raw. Yes, the boy clearly waited for the opportunity to eat, covetously attracting the smells with his rattling nostrils. You can't eat too much, so it doesn't get bad. Let's start with the soup. I pushed a full bowl to it, and bread and meat can be later in the evening, in a couple of hours. Otherwise the stomach will get sick and it will not be good. I know, said the boy, thank you. He greedily took his meal. I looked at him and thought what to do next. Are you going somewhere? Yes, Sarkana. Our caravan is heading right there. Are they waiting for you there? You can say so, he cried. Would you like to come with us? The boy looked at me and studied his face carefully. What are you asking for? Be decent and obey. What to obey? Listen to me. I say take a bath, you go swimming, I say don't eat this, you won't. I don't mind bathing myself, he cried. In the light of the fire, the boy's hair was like castan, the head was wrapped with a cloth, only a couple of strands were pulled out. When I had finished eating, I approached the tractorist and asked for hot bathing water. When she looked at me badly, she realized that the bathroom was worth $7 and almost poured a piece of scented soap into me. Since people in the tavern began to gradually gather, this performance did not go unnoticed. You're relieved, the maid will wash the boy and let him go, said one of the visitors. Let me warm you up myself, said the other. I decided to ignore their falls. Look as if the heater had not collapsed, replied my guardian sharply and stood up, fencing me with his back. That's all I missed. Listen, puppy, I'm gonna blow your ears right now. No one's gonna hurt anyone. Come on, it's late. A tractorist came out to the noise with an impressive size with a shovel in his hands. I hope he's not as crazy as his wife. Sorry, you can't find the boys' clothes by accident? Maybe we'll find something. Bag, look. Why would you give these things to every child? From the youngest, the ticks lie without reason, they will rot soon. And the lady will pay us for the clothes, won't she? If it's gonna cost me anything, I sneezed. We've made an agreement. The bag will bring. Your room is the furthest in the hallway, there are 2 beds. We climbed the stairs and quickly found the right door at the end of the long corridor. Throwing my bag on my back and taking off my shoes, I sat on a single chair. I'm Alina. What's your name? Cassil. How old are you? 10, said the boy, and I was surprised. He looked older. Why do you give birth? So you're gonna get scolded again? I would have handled it perfectly, said the boy. Cassil, regardless of what you could have done to him or not, you shouldn't have provoked him. The best fight is the one that has been avoided. Let's agree not to give in to such stupid provocations? Cassil sneezed, although he seemed to disagree with me. My grandfather was a northern man, I went to him by force. He didn't have a chance at all. I can take care of myself. Understood? And that's very good, Cassil, but let it be your secret weapon. I didn't add that even the strongest single woman can't stand against the crowd. My caretaker sneezed. Meanwhile, they brought a large wooden pillow into the door and filled it with warm water by a third. I looked at the steam coming out of the water with anxiety, I would not mind swimming too. First you take a bath, then I'm not rude. We can ask you to change the water. Is she very rich? That's good. No, not rich, it's just unusual. In rural families so often swim, one after the other. Give me this soap, please. You better not take a bath with him, he's very tight. I have something else in my bag, if you want. I don't like anything else, I need it. He squeezed his teeth at my questioning expression, and then answered quietly, it's from lice. Cassil, you're not a villager, are you? How did you get out there? It's a long story, and the water's cooling. I'll wait at the door outside. I was bathed quickly and with pleasure, but the head was not washed. In the wet weather my spoon will not dry until the morning, and I don't want to get sick at all. Cassila called when she got dressed. They just brought things, and I turned away from the bathroom to lay them on the bed. Things were very simple and very worn, it was pleasant that there were 3 pairs of folded boots of different sizes. The things I've gathered in the castle would fit Cassie, too, but I only took a few changes of clothes, which I now regretted. Who prevented me from getting better prepared? But it's also stupid to give the last pants to Ovanese, if there's an alternative. In the end, I decided to give him a pair of pants and a shirt to get out. For the way, he will also be suited to the clothes brought by the mistress. There was a sharp smell of soap in the room, and there was a splash of water. Cassil, here's things of different sizes, we'll need to measure. Tell me, do you have wounds? I have the ointment with me, I need to treat it so it doesn't get inflamed. Yes. I'll wash it again and show it. 10 minutes later, Cassil stood before me in a canvas wrapped around his thighs. He is thin as a clump, but the folds are quite strong, height almost me, shoulders are thin, but wide for a boy of his age. The hair on the head was lying though clean, but sticky, it was necessary to peel them or cut them. The wounds were bad, even I understood that. Inflammated, ancient, covered with crusts of pus and mud. I took a deep breath of the smell of soap and started the treatment. Cassil looked astonished and unbelieving. Is it so rare here to help a child in trouble? Although he was difficult to perceive as a child, he was even 10 years old. After treating and wrapping the most unpleasant ulcers with bandages, I poured a little restorative remedy into it and sent it to bed. She went down, found companions in the room and asked to take him with her. They didn't mind or even asked for money from above, which surprised me. I think my singing helped. When she returned, she closed her room and fell asleep under Cassil's quiet sound. The resource-saving point could be considered a solemn failure, but I could not do otherwise. Chapter 2. In the morning, Castle picked up 2 pants, boots, socks, a pair of shirts and a warm coat with leather coverings on his elbows, shoulders, upper chest and back. His jacket was big, but besides it, he had only one warm sweater of a small size. I paid only $24 for things. I didn't even negotiate, the price seemed adequate to me. The rain continued on the streets, turning from the rainfall into a dull chicken frost. We had breakfast with hot eggs, Castle ate her own and half my portion, and didn't leave a piece of bread behind. I put yesterday's bread and meat in my bag. I'll give him a snack in a couple of hours. Thank you, Alina. Nothing. We haven't arrived yet, you'll thank me later. How many more days do we have? A week. 9 days, if I don't confuse anything. You sleep while you can, you better get the strength to heal faster. I'm healing fast, I just didn't have the strength. Whether it was from a rich breakfast, or from the freezing rain, but it smelled fast. If I couldn't get comfortable with the damn bags, he'd be like a pear underneath him. Poor boy, what do you have to go through to sleep like this? A couple of hours later, the rain stopped, and I fed the awake Castle. How did you get out there? She sold her mother-in-law to one man, but I struck her. After the death of my father, I was the main heir, our relationship was not good, so she was afraid that I would enter into the rights and expel them with the sisters on the street. Do you want to go home? No, why? Our house is small, consider the land, which is not, income there and for 3 is barely enough for them, and for 4 is definitely not enough. I can't live with her under the same roof, I won't drive her out either. Because of the sisters. So I have a different plan. Do you want to find a job in Sarkhan? You can say so. Why are you there? And I need to go to the magistrate. Castle stressed at my words, but only for a second. I have a matter, I hope that they can help. What's the matter? Confidential, I answered, leaving a mysterious look on me. What does it have to do with candy? No, it's personal, I leaned on a goat boat. Do you like candy? I loved it before. They're delicious. I ran into the bag and took a handful of candy. Castle looked at my palm first, then looked into my face for a few seconds. He took the candy, but very slowly, and hid half of it in his pocket. Eat, I've got more. Or the pocket will stick. You're weird. I don't understand. You look like a barbarian, but you're painfully small and flimsy. You wear expensive clothes, you have expensive candy, like I've never even seen, but you ride in a cart, you sleep in a cheap tavern and you don't complain. Your hands have no molds, so you haven't worked with them, but you travel alone. If you have a family, no one would let you alone. How clever and observant you are, I bit my tongue, because Castle was obviously offended by the baby. Then she moved closer and whispered to her ear so that no one could hear it again, I'm from another world and the cute guys there are called babies. Welcome. Castle shuddered and looked at me in all eyes. From what world? He's called Tahara, I think. But it's a secret, she demonstratively attached her finger to her lips, and moved away with the most independent look. All right, the guy won't take a step away from me until he finds out all the details. Castle looked unhappy at the grove, and then begged me. But I was relentless. Instead of talking, I took care of the wounds and made sure that the new caregiver did not deceive me. He healed really well on him, his wounds looked no better than yesterday. The sky was covered with clouds, although it was no longer raining, so after a while I invited Castle to take a walk. From the cart he was thrown like a spring, he was ready not only to walk, but also to run. At last, an ordinary child woke up in him. After we had almost run around our court, we had gone a decent distance to go beyond the hearing. Ask me, I amusedly abandoned Castle, going for a quick walk. Are you really from another world? Yes, our world is without magic, and here I ended up on a contract. But now it's broken, and I'm traveling to see the world. And I want to meet the magicians from the magistrate. How long have you been here? No, less than a month. I've been thinking about it. Alina, why are you helping me? It's a strange question, because I can't do otherwise. But I'm just a spy. You're a man who's been in difficult circumstances. I only fed you a couple of times. Castle looked at me with huge dark green eyes. In the evening they seemed brown, but now clearly past the bottle shade. A guy will be beautiful when he grows up. Unlike most, he was not a brunette, but a chaten. I need to go to the magistrate, too. It's good that we have a common goal. See how comfortable it is? We'll travel together, you'll tell me about this world. I don't even know how many silver pieces in gold. It's not safe for you to travel without a guard or escort, Alina. That's the first thing I can tell you about this world. Oh, you're fine. By your standards, I am scary, red-headed, and as you know, the protection of an ugly woman is her ugliness. Who told you that stupid thing? You're beautiful and unusual, on the contrary, only makes the situation worse. The same Razum does not take his eye away. The boy walked in silence for a couple of minutes. No, but I'm not defenseless, I said, and then I shuddered, remembering the way my attackers had twisted me the night before the trial. Okay, I admit that I could use security, but I don't have any. And the place I'd left was even more dangerous. Stay with me. I have the strength of the barbarians in me. In a normal fight, I can stand up for myself. And you. Once we get to the magisterium, we'll see what happens. I'll keep you safe. Looking at my new bodyguard with amusement, I was suddenly happy with this outcome. Yes, he's still a boy, but he's as lonely as I am. It's always nice to have someone to take care of you. I agree, Castle. Let's take care of each other. You know, I never had a brother, only an older sister. He relaxed inwardly, as if he had made an important decision. And I became somehow cozy. On the one hand, it's clear that the homeless boy is such a defense. On the other hand, somehow he survived on the street all this time, and so his skills can be useful to me. I'll have to feed 2 of them, of course, but I don't think I can find protection or help for a bowl of food anywhere else. We can live together. Luckily he's not so old that it would cause questions or awkwardness. I have sisters, too, just little ones. How long have you been on the run? Almost a year. It's easier in summer than in winter, of course. There's plenty of food in the woods. Have you tried looking for a part-time job? I did, but it wasn't a part-time job. I had an employer who fed me on copper and beat me on gold. People who have no one to stand up for them don't usually feel sorry for them. But there are good people, aren't there? There are. A widow took me in the fall. She was a good grandmother, kind-hearted and kind. But she died in winter, and her relatives didn't treat me with ceremony. A lump came to my throat, and I gently took Castle's hand. He twitched, but didn't take my hand away. It hung lifelessly in my palm. I'm not going to chase you away. And I don't plan to die yet. I have a lot of things to do in your world. Find a couple, fulfill a goddess's errand. Goddess errand? Once we've decided to take care of each other, there's no point in hiding or concealing anything. The story of my adventures in this world took a good 2 hours, and Castle listened with his mouth open. He especially liked the descriptions of the palace mages and the dozens of Aranar, and he pored over the details with eager eyes. I, too, grew more comfortable as I shared my story. Castle was a great listener, catching every word, but he never once condemned me, only sometimes shook his head. My great-grandfather and great-grandmother were a true couple. My grandfather told my father. It's a silly thing to say no to. In fact, that's why Grandpa went around the world, looking for his mate. He had an affair with Grandma, but it didn't last long. He bought our house. My grandmother was a peasant, she had nothing. He bought a house and some land for his wife and child, and paid for my father's education. Grandfather came by ship every fall, brought money, gifts, helped, but then somehow he didn't come. And the next year he didn't come either. My grandmother was kind, good, but she didn't last long after my father died. Maybe her stepmother wiped her out, who knows? And what was your father? A blacksmith. He made extraordinary weapons with special properties. He forged scabbards and harnesses, too. His gift was strong, but very specific. He could feel metal, he could take a piece of it in his hands and mold it like plasticine. That's an interesting gift. His weapons must have been in demand. We used to live well. He married my mother for love, but she died in her second childbirth. After that my father couldn't work for a long time. He married again, but he didn't feel much better. He loved me, his sisters too, but he tolerated his wife. My stepmother was a copy of my mother in appearance, but her character was completely different. When my father saw her at the fair, he lost his peace. She was from a merchant family, he paid a huge ransom for her, but it was no use. I was 6 when they got married. And then one by one they had sisters, but every year they lived worse and worse, they fought terribly. My stepmother took it out on me, and my father drank too much. He died in early spring, and a month later my stepmother drove me away. Soon I've been on my own for a year. Castle sighed and kicked a pebble with his foot. There was so much longing in his voice and posture that my nose crinkled and my eyes blurred. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and the kid frowned when he saw it. Don't take offense, please, it's just that I'm tearful. I always cry when I'm sad. What can I take from you girls? Castle muttered, but somehow kindly, without offense. I sympathize with you very much. It's hard to lose loved ones and a home. It happens, he said. Did your father teach you how to use a gun?
Yeah.
He was a strong fighter, and he loved guns. He taught me a little. Then do you need to buy a gun? All I got is a kitchen knife. I've got a gun, the boy said. I looked questioningly at his lean figure, dressed in the off-the-shoulder clothes I'd bought yesterday. Castle rolled his eyes and gently showed me the hilt of his blade, so that our companions wouldn't see it. I'd seen Hashel's magical scabbard before, so I wasn't surprised. Why are you so hungry and ragged? I couldn't contain my exclamation, and I got a frown. Because I'm not a thief, okay? Castle typed the words in such a way that it was clear that he had to say this phrase often, and first of all to himself. I tried to get a job as a guard, but I was too old and too tall. I can't sell the blades, they're bound to me by blood. It's a good thing you can't. Your situation will change, and such a unique weapon will remain. The boy nodded and offered to return to the cart. It was time for a snack, so I fed him first, and then showed him the guitar and even played it. Why are you talking about fall and autumn? Let's do something about spring too. I almost dropped the guitar from my hands when I realized what just happened. I quickly started playing and sang along to the music. Be quiet, don't say anything now. I'm singing in my native tongue. And the carriage drivers don't understand us. I'll say we're from the same village. So no one will know you're a magician. Otherwise we'll be in trouble. Castle choked and coughed. I fiddled a little more and put the instrument down. The weather was still sunny, thankful it wasn't drizzling rain. I stretched out on the sax, playing peekaboo with my magically gifted ward. The wagons were moving slowly towards Sarkana, with thawed snow and loose gray spring drifts along the road. The buffaloes occasionally wheezed or snorted, the birds twittered in the nearby woods, and the whole landscape resembled Savrasov's painting. The rooks have arrived, lacking only the turret in the background. Castle's magical abilities are probably to my advantage. I hope that he knows how to control them. It is necessary to pass on the meager knowledge I have to him. I can't determine his reserve, but Shania showed me some concentration exercises, so maybe the boy can do better. That's why he's going to the magistrate. With a nod to the road, I jumped off the cart and left the caravan behind. The boy didn't mind, and joined me. Did you know you have magical powers? Yes. It started a year ago, after my father died. Your stepmother sold you to the coven? She did. And you ran away from the wizards? From a wizard. My powers are obscure, but I've been shown the exercises. I'll teach you. The only useful thing I can do is turn invisible. Although I don't have the strength for that right now. You'll regain your reserve. Not for me. I grew up in a world without magic, so my ability to restore reserve has atrophied. Atrophied? He mumbled the new word. Gone. Gone for good. How so? I could use Renar's reserve, but he wouldn't share it with me. That's why it didn't work out. Can you use mine? Don't you feel sorry for him? No. It'll regenerate. Besides, I can't do anything yet anyway. Let's give it a try. After a few dozen fruitless attempts, I gave up. However, the training didn't go to waste. By touch, I was able to determine Castle's reserve, and then my own. Mine was huge compared to the kids'. Too bad it was as empty as a drunk's wallet. You can call me Cass. I'll call you Lena. No, I don't like shortening my name. Call me Alina. But that's a long time. Just take an extra second, you're on borrowed time, aren't you? What kind of time? You know, the kind you sign for on your timesheet. They don't give you time, it comes from you. That's what I'm talking about. I completely confused the boy, making him frown and shut up. What is a timesheet? A list or a document that contains all kinds of data. I went into a lengthy explanation with examples from university life. Cass cheered up, asking questions and laughing at some of the tales from student life. When you get to the magistrate, you'll have classmates too.
Yeah.
But they don't like street kids anywhere. We won't tell anyone. We'll buy you nice things, no one will know, especially since there are scholarships in places like this. After hearing Sanaya's story, Castle cheered up and decided to serve at court. He had already spent the Emperor's scholarship in his mind. Castle, I've been meaning to ask you for a long time. If you have gods in your world, why are there no temples? No one even mentions them in speech especially. Of course they don't. And you keep quiet, he frowned. It is better to keep silent about the gods, so as not to draw their attention to oneself. And as for temples, why would they be needed? People live their own lives, and the gods their own. But how can you summon them? I was confused. Yes, and for each call they take a sacrifice, and they choose themselves. No one in their right mind would mess with them, because they'd be in so much trouble. But there must have been some way to placate them, I insisted. Are you kidding me? Who do you want to placate? The all-powerful eternal gods. What can you give them that's not already in their power? My father always said that for the gods we are like sand on the beach, no one will ever think about the problems of grains of sand, and no one cares about their rustling in the wind. Understand? Yes, I answered, though it didn't make sense. The days dragged on, Cass and I chatted and fooled around, and I fattened up my new ward. After a couple of days, the painful sharpness was gone from his features, and his wounds healed. By the end of the trip, he had slipped from being terribly skinny to frighteningly thin. My bruise and facial scratch had faded as well, so we planned to enter Sarkana as decent human beings rather than battered orphans. Using the free time, Castle showed us a few self-defense techniques. His science suited me well, because we were about the same height, and I had frankly little strength. A couple of times we involved Razum in training, but then Castle categorically opposed joint training. He clearly disliked the younger of the horsemen, watched him more closely than the others, and tensed when he spoke to me. The reason for this attitude was not quite clear, but I took it calmly, for neither of them had ever crossed the bounds of propriety. Razum began to talk more and more often about my need for a protector and the fact that the boy couldn't be much of a defense, but I ignored all such talk. In addition to small training episodes, we also practiced magic, and Castle's progress was far more serious than mine. The only thing I was able to learn was how to determine my reserve. That was good, of course, but it was of little practical use, if only because it was empty. Hopes that it would be replenished at least a little at a time melted away by the end of the trip. Castle had a small firefly, which he used to send around the room in the evenings. I sang in the evenings in the inns where we stayed. My music was to the listeners' liking, and the innkeepers sometimes gave me free food. One of them didn't even charge me for a night's stay, which was very pleasant. My charioteers looked at what was going on calmly and tried to stay close to me to protect me from unnecessary attention. One evening the well-dressed gentleman even thanked me with a couple of silver pieces, which was unexpectedly pleasant. Castle listened to my songs with pleasure. I had cut his hair and tidied him up as best I could, so he looked better than when we met. His clothes were still poor, of course, but that could not be helped, for I was saving his only decent set for the magistrate's visit. Chapter 3. Another inn welcomed us with a roar and a roar. Unlike cows, buffaloes did not moo, but roared, especially when they were in the vicinity of talers, domesticated predators. The house was apparently divided into two halves, rich and poor. Next to the poor half was an enclosed pen for herbivores, on which several talers were lolling about. The buffaloes were fretting and making noise, the thalers were beating their tails on the roof, and the owners of both were settling their relations. Alas, the conflict developed in favor of the cat owners, but the general discontent and tension was in the air. Our charioteers could not pass by either, so familiar bassy notes were added to the disorderly chorus of voices, and the scandal took a new turn. Take the talers away, there's an enclosure for them on the other side of the building. They're free-loving animals, we can't order them around. They are not a danger, all the animals are fed. They make our animals nervous so they can't rest for tomorrow's journey and eat. Then you should have stayed in an inn reserved for the poor, you wouldn't have this problem. We're not beggars, we're merchants. And what do you sell? Buffalo cakes. At least that's what you smell like, came a mocking voice. The quarrel was escalating, so Castle and I thought it best to leave the courtyard and go inside the house, only there was no peace. The large guest room was also divided into two parts, with the innkeeper's counter in the middle. There were no tables on the poorer half, and on the richer half there was such hot contempt in the air that you could warm your hands on it. The people were loudly indignant, and only the owner of this bedlam remained serene, taking orders with a smile and hurrying the two young peddlers. An older, statuesque woman occasionally emerged from the kitchen, her face full of zen. The girls, similar to each other, were nimbly scurrying between the tables, arranging various dishes from trays. The poorer half had porridge, boiled eggs, and soup, while the richer half had a meat stew, a shrimp appetizer, and a bright orange soup I'd never tasted before. Of course, it would have been smarter to eat cheaper, but the lack of available seats on one side and the presence of shrimp on the other forced me to make an economically disadvantageous decision. After all, after a long road trip, I wanted to treat myself a little. The food came quickly, and it was delicious, even though it cost twice as much. I traded a portion of shrimp with Castle for a portion of meat stew and savored the food slowly and with pleasure. I love shrimp, what can I do? The soup turned out to be fruity, a delicate unfamiliar sweet flavor pleasantly enveloped my tongue, there was something of yams, pumpkin and even mango in it. Using the soup as a sauce for the shrimp, I blissfully sprawled across the table. My pupil was not lagging behind, he had eaten 2 large portions of stew and was now enjoying the sweet, cooled soup for dessert. Slanted glances from the neighboring tables hinted that we were eating out of order. Catching the eye of one of the bearded guests, I ostentatiously picked up a shrimp with my fingers and dipped it in the soup. The man wrinkled his nose and said something to his companions, and they burst into laughter. The man said something to his companions, and they burst into laughter. Castle looked around and, not finding our companions, leaned toward me. Alina, we should split up with the caravan. There are only 2 nights left, we should be in Sarkhan the day after tomorrow night, but I sense danger coming from Razum. Come on, Castle, you're just imagining things, I objected. No, Alina, I see the eyes he looks at you, and it is clear to everyone that his interest is not reciprocal. I could be wrong, but I think that he may decide to act rudely. Castle was silent, looking at my face. There are a lot of wagons here, active communication, and we can get there on foot, if not in 2 days, then in 3. Understand? Castle, you're exaggerating. Yes, Razum likes me, but that's all. He won't attack me. You're too naive. Believe me, I've seen all sorts of things in a year of vagrancy. Now he's fighting between his lower instincts and his upbringing, and I don't want to see which will win. The risk is too high. Castle, this is a civilized society with its own rules and laws. We haven't even seen a single fight the whole trip. There were 2 fights, but I managed to get you upstairs before they started. Alina, just trust me, I know what I'm talking about, he frowned, and it was clear he wouldn't back down. Okay. What do we do now? Don't rent a room, there are 3 other inns nearby. We'll spend the night in one of them, and in the morning we'll tell our companions that we've decided to stay here for a couple more days. The main thing is to make it so that the carts are ready to leave, then Razum will have no choice but to continue on his way. And we'll be a day behind them. If you think it's necessary, that's fine, I took a deep breath and accepted it. Trust was a choice, and sometimes you had to make it. Come on, there has to be another way out of here. We slipped out from behind the desk and headed deeper into the room. There was another exit by the stairs to the 2nd floor, leading to the Thaler pen. Castle pulled me by the hand, and under the cover of various buildings we moved away from the escort. The inn he had chosen was much smaller, quieter, and cleaner. We bathed, washed our clothes, and went to bed. The room was paid for until lunchtime tomorrow, so there was plenty of time to rest. I fell asleep in a good mood, but I had a disturbing dream. In it, Renar was thrashing around, and I could feel Cheriton's touch. I woke up to a hairpin that had been given to me, and I felt it digging into my side. I used it to pin my braid at night, and I didn't want to take it off, but it was uncomfortable to sleep with it on my head. It was dark outside the window, Castle was snoring peacefully in the next bunk, and I thought about Reynard. Taking care of the former street kid was too much to think about. Cass was almost always demanding my attention, as if checking to see if I'd point him out the door. Would I really be able to devote much time to him? Despite his height and build, he was still a child at heart, not even a teenager, and he demanded the love his stepmother couldn't give him. He needed constant physical contact for peace of mind, and sometimes he would take my hand even if we were just chatting side by side on the cart. He needed me, and that feeling of need helped him deal with the hurt of Renard's betrayal. I chased away the rare thoughts of my handsome ex-fiancé. The most frustrating part was that I still couldn't get really angry with him. Deep down, I had already recognized him as my match, and further perceived as obstacles to mutual understanding. Even now, it seemed to me that if Renard had known me, if we'd had a chance to get to know each other, none of this would have happened. Besides, my thoughts kept returning to the dagger I'd so easily thrown at him. I'd never hurt a living thing before, and I'd thrown it at him without thinking. And I was ashamed of it. It was clear from the start that the Emperor was not my party, that we were too different, but our connection was bright, though painful, and I flew into the fire with the tenacity of the stupidest moth. It was hurtful and painful to believe that he wanted my execution, but there was no other way to interpret the situation. I'd been deliberately kept out of the room, I'd been framed, and my fiancé had chosen to take me out by other people's hands instead of protecting me. And he knew I was innocent. There was no excuse. The council's imposed wife was in the way, so he chose to eliminate her that way. It's called big politics, the stakes are too high to afford to be decent. However, deep down it was bitter and frustrating precisely because I was not indifferent to Renard. I had allowed myself romantic dreams, to consider him a fiancé and future husband, so his act scratched especially hard. This wasn't just an attempted murder or assassination, with unknown or unsavory people behind it. This was a betrayal of a man I had mentally let close to me for some reason. Now I was free from his influence and the dangers of others awaited me, and besides, I had a friend, and that was much more important than a failed first crush. I fell asleep with these thoughts, only to jump up a short time later when there was a knock at the door. Contrary to my fears, it wasn't Renard and Cheriton, but the landlady's son, who had come to wake us before we left. We didn't have time for breakfast, so we went to explain ourselves to Razum on an empty stomach. Shouting from the neighboring yard came even to us, and as we got closer we even recognized the voices. "It's time to go, Razum. They told you that the girl didn't get a room here, either the kid got her into trouble, or she got mixed up with some guy and spent the night at his place. You shouldn't be drooling, she ain't your type. Let's wait another 10 minutes, maybe the bird will come," said the eldest, laughing. "Good morning, gentlemen. Castle and I have urgent business and we have to leave the caravan behind. Thank you very much for the refreshments, company and attention. We'll take it from here." Razum gritted his teeth and angrily threw some things into the cart. Without a word, he jumped onto the goats and whipped the harnessed animals with all his might on their glossy gray flanks. I had not expected such cruelty, and my whole body shuddered as the unfortunate buffalo roared and trotted off into the pre-dawn darkness. The other riders said,
Goodbye.
politely, and followed. Castle gave me an expressive look, and I shrugged. When we returned, we went to bed and stayed in bed until mid-afternoon. Food was served in the common room, where, after a hearty lunch, we encountered a small group of well-dressed, anxious people. A thin, short brunette woman was holding a sleeping boy in her arms. The company took their takeout food, stretched their legs and began to load into their carriage. They were traveling in a small stagecoach pulled by two massive thalers driven by two riders. Castle looked at the stagecoach with such childlike delight that I couldn't resist asking. Excuse me, do you have 2 vacant seats for us? The haggard brunette glanced at me and nodded. Sunny day. There are seats, but we're planning on traveling almost non-stop all the way to Sarkana. Cass and I nodded and climbed into the stagecoach. Only 6 of the 10 seats were occupied, not including us. The stagecoach itself was wooden, and it looked very colorful. Bright yellow wheels and yellow ornaments on the cab, good corduroy interior. The cost was a pleasant surprise, only a silver one for 2. On the one hand, we had no urgency, and on the other hand, we didn't want to go through the wet spring roads on foot or ride in a dubious company. Sneakily I looked at the passengers. The girl with the child was excited to the limit, her emotions were clearly readable on her pale face. She was accompanied by 2 men, all of whom kept casting worried glances at the sleeping boy. The others, an elderly lady in dark burgundy and her husband, looked sympathetically at both the boy and his companions. Judging by his height, the child was about 4 or 5 years old. The lady was the first to speak, rubbing her handkerchief in her hands, she addressed the girl. Dia Janina, how is the boy? He seems to be as well. I hope we'll make it in time. Of course we will. The magistrate has the best healers, I'm sure they can help you. One of the men accompanying the young girl has entered the conversation. We've gone to the best healers, but it's the curse. The curse is so strong that only a very powerful mage can remove it. Why would anyone want to curse a child? A struggle for the inheritance? The companion of the lady in burgundy asked, not hiding his curiosity. No, the young brunette answered quietly, I am the other closest heir, as well as the boy's uncle, but he is beyond suspicion, he loves his nephew very much. Casting a glance at the elderly attendant, she rocked the boy in her arms. The atmosphere in the stagecoach was tense, and I felt sorry for both the son and his young mother. I could see how much the girl loved the child and how reverently she held the little body in her arms. I felt embarrassed that we had to witness this drama. The silence in the stagecoach was heavy, and I could not take my eyes off the distress of others, looking at the participants. I had the impression that the man in the dark green coat was Janina's father, they looked quite alike, even frowning in the same way. Periodically he would feel the boy's pulse and seem to infuse him with energy. The second attendant was much older, but he looked only at the boy, glancing at Janina and her father only occasionally. Janina herself was a beauty, even with the tragic expression on her face and the bitten lips. Slender features, fair skin, and light brown, almost amber eyes framed by thick, long lashes. It was bitter to watch her, because the girl's bitter emotions were written all over her face. Twice the stagecoach made short stops at small inns. Some of the passengers took food, some used the restroom, but none of the stops lasted more than 15 minutes. The stagecoach traveled very fast and by dusk we entered the mountainous countryside. The road looped, turning serpentine in places, and we climbed higher and higher, and I was glad we didn't have to walk up the mountain. Janina refused to eat, and at one point I couldn't stand it and offered her candy. Try some, they're delicious. Thanks, I'm not hungry. You need your strength. I still have some breadcrumbs, cookies and dried shrimp. Would you like some? Dried shrimp? Yes. It's a heartbreaker, but take some candy. I gave her a handful with a smile, and she took it unexpectedly. You have such an unusual appearance, are you from the northern continent? No, but I'm not from Almendria. My name is Alina, nice to meet you. Janina, nice to meet you. We two are on our way straight to the magistrate's office, and it's a great pleasure to meet you. Allow me to introduce my ward, Castle. The boy nodded politely, but the conversation was still not going well. It was boring to sit in silence, and the atmosphere was not conducive to casual conversation, so after a couple more hours and writing down a couple of songs I remembered in my notebook, I took out my guitar and asked permission to play. At first I just played melodies, then I sang, and Janina burst into tears. Confused, I stopped in the middle of the song and squirmed in my seat. No, please don't stop, her father said. I continued hesitantly, and Janina was crying, tucked into the boy's chest. The lady in maroon was also wiping her tears, and I felt extremely uncomfortable. Yes, well done, Alina, she diffused the situation perfectly. After crying, Janina fell asleep, and her companions breathed a sigh of relief. Having laid her daughter on the seat, the older man took the boy in his arms and moved to a free seat, and the second man fell asleep sitting up. It was a moonlit night outside the window. I looked at the silhouettes of the mountains, the paved stone road sparkling with silver light, and I began to fall into a half-sleep when I felt some movement ahead of me. I woke Castle and the lady in dark burgundy sitting next to me and went to the window. There are silhouettes out there. After this phrase, the stagecoach became fidgety. We were obviously accelerating, the wheels creaked, and the men looked tense. Handing the boy back to his mother, Janina's attendant snatched up a dagger, while her father was concentrating on weaving some kind of spell, his hands shrouded in a glow. The stagecoach came to an abrupt halt, screams erupted outside, and the door was ripped off its hinges. Men out. Not wanting to cause carnage in the cramped cabin, the men stepped out in a coordinated fashion, Castle being one of the first to jump out. My ring, where the fire net had been absorbed after the Minhotep attack, was slightly warm. Fearing that the net would pop up inside the cabin and cause harm, I quietly climbed out as well. The stagecoach was surrounded by bandits, their leaders strutting around in front of us with a satisfied look. My companions remained calm. Gentlemen, what an imprudent decision to go over the pass at night. I'll tell you in confidence, it's not safe, the young, unkempt man with several large scars on his face chuckled at his own joke and continued. But we are merciful people, ready to guarantee you safe passage for only 50 gold pieces per nose. The leader grinned, his teeth bared, and I shuddered in disgust. So the balance of power was not in our favor. I counted 16 members of the gang, and we had 5 men, Castle, and me with an obscure artifact that was starting to burn on my finger. What will happen to those who don't have the means? Castle asked the question. I think he realized that we had nothing to pay back. We'll keep the pretty boys and girls for entertainment. And the rest of us will go to the bottom of the gorge. I hear it's beautiful there, the bandit grinned mockingly. The gang cackled, some of them shifting, slightly breaking the semicircle. Where's our money? A woman shrieked hoarsely, and I found her with a glance. She looked ragged, dressed in men's clothes, her face puffy and puffy. What, you don't like me? I'm going to have a little fun with you, and there will be nothing left of your beauty. A whip sounded in the air, and I threw my hands up, instinctively covering my face. A lash of fire erupted, and the 3 opponents opposite me fell to the rocky roadside. You bitch! The whip-wielding bandit shrieked and swung again. The others had already drawn their weapons, and I had no choice but to continue wielding the fiery whip net. There were sounds of fighting behind me as well. Alina, I'll cover you, Castle growled, and I was overcome with a kind of universal indifference. My mind worked quickly and clearly, and my hands moved on their own, one swinging and applying burns, the other acting as a counterweight to keep my balance. After taking down at least 6 of them, I turned to my companions. They were crowding the 4 remaining bandits, but the leader was sitting on the side of the road, and magic was beginning to swirl around him. He didn't like the fire lash, but he threw a spell, and I was tangentially burned with cold, and one arm went limp. The whip hung lifelessly, but I was no longer a threat. Castle dealt with 2 opponents at once, moving quickly and deftly. Hardly anyone expected such deadly agility from a boy. Janina's father, stunned with magic, and his companion worked with a dagger. A lady in maroon appeared in the doorway and deftly took down one of her attackers with a shot straight to the face. The small crossbow in her hands proved to be a more than formidable weapon. The second bolt she fired lodged in the back of the bandit fighting her husband. The last man left standing was rendered unconscious by Janina's father. Wasting no time, he rushed to the charioteers and talers. Apparently, the tired men and animals had been affected by some kind of magic. Janina's father had to bring them to their senses, open the blocked passageway and drag the bodies that were obstructing the road. The husband of the lady in Burgundy stepped aside, checking the pulse of the defeated bandits. Janina's second companion helped everyone into the stagecoach and then put the door back on. A couple minutes later, the last of the passengers returned, eyes blazing. The stagecoach moved gently, and I huddled against the wall, frantically twisting the ring on my finger. If I was used to ovens, this artifact was a different matter. How much energy did it hold? I thought the fire net had eaten up all of my reserve last time, but apparently some of it had transferred back into the ring when I removed the whip at Renard's request. Alina, that was amazing. Cassiel took both my hands and looked into my eyes, ignoring the bloody scratch on his side. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have made it. That's right. Your fire lash made an impression. Firebenders are extremely rare. Janina's father looked at me with genuine admiration as he healed the cut wound on his companion's shoulder. The men who had fought with the weapons were wounded to varying degrees of severity. Even Cassiel had suffered a few cuts that had rendered both his shirt and jacket in disrepair. You're a healer. Yes, but I can easily put a couple of bandits down with a soporific spell, he said as he began to treat my pupil. We all fought very honorably, Janina's companion said gravely. The lady in maroon shrugged. To hell with them, the Emperor didn't catch enough of them. But that's all right, you can't take us with bare bayonets either. I hope I haven't killed anyone, I whispered. What are you, my dear? All your people were alive. The husband of the lady in Burgundy smiled kindly at me. Don't worry, your conscience is clear. Ardelia, darling, you're a knockout. The lady in Burgundy blushed, and I looked shocked at this nice elderly couple. Was he the one praising her now for killing 2 people? Though how could I judge? I had 3 corpses on my conscience, and even though I didn't kill them myself, the deadly magic belonged to me. I'd like to recognize the young man's fighting skills. He successfully held off the onslaught of 3 opponents at once, his strength and speed. And my companions began to discuss the details of the fleeting battle, complimenting each other and sharing details of their battles. On the one hand, the gang would no doubt have killed us and attacked first, but on the other hand, we had left more than a dozen men to die slowly on the road. When everyone present had been helped, Janina's father leaned back tiredly in his seat and dozed off. What will happen to them next? I asked timidly. We'll notify the Imperial Service of the accident, and the bodies will be removed the day after tomorrow, at the latest. But there were survivors, I frowned. No, sweetheart, I took care of that, the elderly gentleman who'd returned to the stagecoach last replied with a soft smile. I could hardly keep from screaming. I'm sorry, Mrs. Aliena, that I had to shock you like this, but think about it. As good citizens, we should have either killed them or taken them to Sarkana to stand trial. They'd still face the death penalty for armed assault, and they'd have been a mess if we transported them ourselves. No, my dear, when you attack another man with a gun, you must be prepared to die. Besides, I'm glad to clear the country of a dozen scumbags. But what if we had people in our place who couldn't fight back? I understand your point, but it's all so cruel, I whispered. The world is cruel, my dear Alina, especially to those who cannot defend themselves. The other companions nodded, and even Cassiel was in agreement with them. I stared out the window.
Yeah.
This isn't Counter-Strike, where at the end you're just glad your team won. Our non-magical world is much safer. Or do I just think so, because I personally have not encountered war, or even aggressive gangs? I grew up in a good neighborhood, but I only read about crime in documents, news, and textbooks. There's a reason legal officers are so cynical. When you face death, you change. The stagecoach became quiet, and gradually everyone dozed off. Chapter 4. We arrived in Sarkana the next day in the afternoon. The couple exited at the Imperial Security Gate, bidding a warm farewell to everyone else. And we continued on our way to the magistrate. The building of the main magical center of the empire was impressive in size. In fact, it was an independent fenced half of the city, pointing to the sky dozens of light-colored towers covered with light-colored tiles. The fence surrounding the area sparkled with stone lace. I could clearly feel the magic and couldn't take my eyes off this work of architectural art. The fence looked like a ribbon decorated with an outlandish ornament, so skillful was the stone carving. About 2.5 meters high, it snaked away as far as the eye could see. I wanted to touch it, but my intuition told me it was not the safest thing to do. The carved stone gate, made in the same style as the fence, was opened, and the duty officers came out to meet us. "Good afternoon. What is it?" "Curse removal and healer's services," Janina's father replied. "Admission to the magisterium for training," Castle said quietly. "Counseling for magical abilities," I added mentally. We were allowed into the magistrate's territory, and it turned out that the skillfully made fence was just the beginning. The grounds were breathtaking in their splendor. All the buildings were made in the same style, forming a single ensemble, but each had its own zest. The main material of construction was stone, buildings were made of light granite or marble, and brighter colors were used for finishing. The buildings themselves seemed light and airy, as if soaring into the sky. High lancet windows, graceful narrow arches decorated with stone lace, small twisted balconies and narrow staircases created the impression of a fairy tale city. The royal palace could not even come close to this exquisite beauty. With our mouths open, Castle and I automatically followed Janina and her escorts. The desire to photograph this openwork marble luxury literally burned my hands, and it was a pity that there was no way to do it. My admiring gaze darted from one structure to another, noting the details, admiring the overall harmony. The main alley led to one of the tallest buildings, the facade of which was decorated with dozens of narrow lancet windows with colored stained glass. It is hard to imagine the beauty of the interior decoration of the premises, when the sunlight penetrating into the colored windows plays in them multicolored highlights. As I looked at the magisterium, I realized that magic is replacing religion in this world. Even the finest cathedrals and palaces of earth lost in splendor to this place. The entire grounds were lined with flowers and trees, but now nature was just beginning to awaken. The lawn stood dirty cherry, and I was surprised to realize that the grass had already started to grow here, but it was maroon. As I approached one of the white-stemmed trees, I was amazed to see delicate ruby leaves poking out of dark brown buds. The contrast between the white buildings and the purple plants would probably be especially gorgeous in summer. The wine-colored grass seemed unfamiliar, but there are plants with such colors in our world, too: red leaf maple, purple birch, and many others. In this park, all the awakening plants were striking in various shades from dark cherry to scarlet. It was probably here that I first realized how very different this world was. No magic, no portals, no spells were as striking as the burgundy grass. Meanwhile, we were already at the entrance to one of the main buildings. As we entered the spacious reception area, the secretary pointed to several waiting chairs, where we were seated. There were more visitors in line in front of us, but I was more interested in the interior. Inside, the room was decorated in light colors: coffee beige marble in the form of elegant mosaics on the floor, milky walls with graphic drawings and ornaments, high vaulted ceilings. All the furniture is in the same wine colors, but there is quite little of it, so the room looks spacious and light. Visitors were invited one by one into the reception area, and we waited our turn. Janina sat with a straight back, holding her son in her arms. I suddenly realized that I didn't even know his name. Carefully sitting down next to her, I dared to speak to her. "Yes, Yanina, we haven't had a chance to talk." The skinny brunette nodded at me with a fake smile. "Indeed, it was not good. I never thanked you for your help with the bandits. We couldn't have done it without you. We all couldn't have done it without each other. Could you hold Barkai for a second while I find the bathroom? While there's time." "Sure, why not?" The boy was surprisingly light for his age. Besides, his face and skin were strange. If from afar it looked like he was asleep, now it was clear that Barkai was seriously ill. His skin was grayish transparent, his breathing was rare and weak, and his heart beat slowly, as if with strain. Castle sat down beside me and scrutinized the boy, too, then put his hand on his forehead. Cold. What's wrong with him? I don't know, Cass, they said something about a curse. Hopefully it can be broken. It's not just a curse, Janina's father intervened, it's the strongest enchantment I've ever seen. You see, I'm not the strongest, but I'm quite an experienced healer, and here I'm faced with a completely strange picture. It would be logical to assume that the life force would be leaving the cursed one, except in this case it's not like that. It's as if Barkai is disappearing. His aura has thinned to the point where even his body is beginning to melt. I hope you can get help. If it's a curse, is there any way to get rid of it? Unfortunately, not always, it depends on the person who cursed. There are two types of curses, ordinary and death curses. Normal curses can be reversed, but death curses cannot. In addition, the one who breaks the curse must be stronger than the one who cast it, it's a must. We hope to find a strong mage who can identify the characteristics and get rid of it. If it's a death curse, it's likely to come true. Barkai's grandfather pressed his lips together and frowned. How could there even be a monster that could curse such a small child? As you can see, he did. I really hope for the most favorable outcome, it's a pity we can't do anything to help. It's very hard for Janina to lose a son, her husband died just 2 years ago. I'm very sorry. I've come to terms with the loss of my husband, Janina returned and gently stroked her son's face and took him away from me, but I can't live without Barkai. Janina, don't. It's true, Papa. First our house, then our husband, then magic, and now this. The young brunette's gaze was so painful that tears came to my eyes and my chest filled with a premonition of inevitable tragedy. Sobbing, I caught a few surprised looks. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a crybaby, I said through my tears. Suddenly Janina and her companions smiled. The door to the waiting room opened and the last visitor came out. It was our turn. Janina and her companions disappeared into the office, and Cass and I were left alone in the room. The minutes of waiting dragged on, merging into hours. After studying all the wall patterns, the plumbing in the nearest bathroom, and even the contents of my bag, we had a snack and then dozed in our chairs. There were no other visitors besides us. It was getting dark outside. The dream was disturbing and agonizing, in which Barkai was dying and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Finally the waiting room filled with people and sounds, with a dead pale Janina standing in the middle and men clenching their fists. The representatives of the magistrate accompanying them looked dejected and frowned. I'm sorry, Mrs. Janina. The only one who could try to help you is Mr. Cheriton Torvile. Try him. Barkai will not survive the journey to the capital. Janina replied in doom. In that case, I recommend using a portal. But portals fix spells, whispered the young mother in despair. You're choosing between guaranteed death and a ghostly chance of life. I'm sorry, the young, thin, brunette man in the dark purple coat looked at Castle and me. Who are you? We were expecting a reception. The man scrutinized me, then Castle, then turned his gaze back to me, lingering on my hair. His scrutiny made me uncomfortable, the black circled eyes sending goosebumps on a mini run down my spine. My appointment hours are over for today, but I'll see you tomorrow morning, no waiting list. Please wait here, I'll see if we have any waiting rooms available. Leaving us alone, he disappeared behind the office door. Even if by some miracle we are in the capital today, how do we get to the palace? How do we find Mr. Torvile and convince him to help us? Janina whispered with muffled, hopeless despair. It's not that hard to get into the palace, and it's quite easy to convince Cheriton to help. He owes me a favor, and I think he'd be glad to get rid of the obligation. Everyone in the room stared at me as if I were a deity. Mistress Alina, High Mage Cheriton owes you a favor, and you want to spend it on someone else's child? Janina's father asked stunned. So many hours together, and we haven't even gotten to know each other, I said. Excuse me, what's your name? Tissay. Nice to meet you, Mr. Tissay. Yes, that's right. The only thing is that I don't really want to go back to the palace, so why don't I bring the letter with me? I'm afraid we can't do it without you. Alina, I'm begging you, come with us. At that moment there was a crackling and some fiddling in the office, and a familiar low voice echoed through the reception room. Where is she? The door swung open, and Renar appeared, disheveled and angry. I should disappear, but the reserve is empty, and his filler is standing there, shooting lightning from his eyes. Behind him are familiar faces, Cheriton and Haschel. Good evening. How fortunate, Cheriton, I need you, I whispered fearfully, trying not to betray the trembling of my voice. What? Cheriton? You need Cheriton? Renar flew over to me and wrapped his arms around me. Do you have any idea what we've been through? We've been looking all over the country for you. I barely slept, do you know how worried I was? Looking down at him, I was completely confused. You were looking for me to be executed? Worried I'd stay alive? I finally broke away, twisting out of his embrace and pushing his hands away. Alina, listen to me. There at the trial I deliberately stayed out of the farce. I had evidence of guilt from 2 of the judges, including the Supreme Court. I neither objected to the verdict nor asked for a pardon simply because I planned to overturn it and remove both judges. There were magistrates and other judges in the courtroom, and I wanted to use this trial as a show trial, to beat them up for all their mistakes and incompetence. I would never let anyone execute my fiancé. Are you kidding me? You've said so many times you wouldn't mind getting rid of me, wouldn't my execution be good for you? I wasn't thrilled about our engagement, but someone's obsession with my fiancé is more annoying, he said angrily. Oh, more annoying. So you'd rather deal with your enemies first and leave me for dessert? Thank you, not interested. Besides, I broke the pact. A contract yes, but an engagement no. So whether you like it or not, you're still my fiancé. Renar took my hand and pressed my palm against his cheek. I should have told you my plan beforehand, but I wanted it to look natural. Who would have thought you'd be so frisky and have so much support in my own palace? Did you punish those who helped me? I felt sick just thinking about it. No, I thought it would upset you, he said. I stared at Renar in amazement. What was that now? Did he think about my feelings? I feel the way you feel, he said. At the trial, I was so hurt by the betrayal that I could barely fight. I should have told you my plans. I stood and blinked and stood. The new concept of the world, with Renar admitting his mistakes, thinking about my feelings, worrying and searching, somehow didn't fit in my head. Either my head was too small or the concept wasn't the right size. Still unable to figure it out, I turned my attention to another pressing problem. We have a child dying. We need Cheriton's help. Of course we do. We should go back to the palace, I'll open the portal. No, I didn't come all this way to go back to the palace without knowing or seeing anything. Besides, the baby can't go through the portal because it reinforces the spell. He has a very complex curse on him, Cheriton regarded Barkai thoughtfully. How long has it been going on? It started about a month ago. He started getting weaker, and we didn't even notice it at first. It got really bad a week ago, and we started traveling, afraid to use the portal. We thought the magisterium might be able to help us. I'm a healer myself, but the only thing I've been able to do is keep him strong. I think that's the only reason he's still alive. It's not so much about your healing skills, it's about kinship. The curse, as I understand it, is designed to make him disappear from our world, so that no memory of him remains. His toys started disappearing 2 weeks ago, Janina whispered confusedly. Die Velgers has forgotten about him. Janina's other companion intervened. Pardon me, allow me to introduce myself, Ackles Velsword, I am Barkai's uncle. A week ago, just before I left, I spoke to my acquaintance, Die Velgers, and told him I was taking my nephew to the magistrate. He was very surprised, as if he had never known that I had a nephew, though he knew the boy. I thought at the time that he'd gone bad in his old age. No, it's the effect of the curse. First distant acquaintances, then buddies, gradually everyone will forget. Even me? Janina's voice trembled quietly. Even you, the mage nodded. As a mother, probably last, but still. Is there anything that can be done to save him? You promised me a favor, I interjected. I remember, Mrs. Aliena. At first glance I think not, although I have a very old book on curses, which describes various unusual cases. Besides, there are some of the most talented cursers in the palace, we should show them the boy. We can try, but the chances are slim. We need to get back to the palace as soon as possible. What about the anchoring? Can we use the portal? I can't bring the book here, Sheraton lowered his voice, emphasizing the last word. I'd be much more comfortable working in my lab. Locking works on enchantments, but curses follow a different set of rules. I'm ready to deal with this case, only on the condition that you, Alina, come with us. Sheraton, the old bug, always tries to make the best of a situation. Janina gave me a pleading look. Mistress Alina, please, please, I will be forever in your debt. Janina's voice was ringing with hope and pleading. How can one refuse a mother with a dying child in her arms? I couldn't, I nodded meekly, feeling the doors of the invisible trap slamming shut. Renar opened a portal right in the middle of the room, and those present disappeared into it one by one. Castle gave me a questioning look, and I nodded. No, I had no desire to go back. In fact, I had a magical counseling session scheduled for tomorrow, and even a spot without a waiting list. A sudden hunch flashed through my brain. That painted turkey gave me away to Renar. Otherwise, why would the Emperor appear here so suddenly? It's even a shame to leave without expressing my fae. But that's the way it is, Sheraton's got me. You know, I don't really feel like going back to the palace. Aliena, Sheraton said your presence is essential. I had tears in my eyes. I'd overcome so much, riding in those awful carts, fighting bandits to get to the magistrate, and what in the end? If that's how he really wanted me, I can't get out a second time. Promise me you'll bring me back here when I ask you to. I lifted my chin stubbornly and looked into his dark eyes. I can promise that I'll come back with you when you want me to. I'm afraid I can't let you go alone anymore. First we have to find out who else is so eager for you to die and who's up to their necks in our marriage. Alina, I can't hold the portal forever, so let's talk on the other side. He took a quick step, pulled me close to him, pulled me under his buttocks, and carried me into the portal. The backside was empty, only the maid said that Cassiel was already in the bedroom next to mine, and the others were in Sheraton's study and would call us if we were needed. Bring us dinner and tea in my sitting room. He carried me down the corridors of the palace, and at one point I had to grab his shoulders to keep from falling. I didn't have the strength to resist, the sleepless night had taken its toll, and at some point I just buried my face in his neck. Closing my eyes, I was surprised to realize that my reserve was being restored, and power was flowing from him to me. Renar? I didn't mean it. Take it, you're empty, he said, squeezing me tighter in this intimate embrace. He pushed the door open with his foot and stepped into the large living room, furnished in a rather laconic and masculine manner. Beige floors and walls, navy blue carpet on the floor, curtains to match the tone on several of the windows. The furniture is simple but elegant, without curls and inlays, made of light oak and finished with dark blue velour. Drinks and food were already served on the table next to the sofa, the fireplace and a few sconces on the far wall were burning, plunging the room into a cozy twilight. He sat down on the couch without letting go of my hands and turned me sideways toward him. Not the most comfortable position for eating, I commented. Instead of answering, he leaned back against the couch and closed his eyes. I snatched a pie from the table and let myself be pulled to my chest, exhausting my limit of surprise at his behavior. We sat in silence for a while, deluded by my chewing. The pie was delicious and soft, so I shamelessly crumbled it right on top of His Majesty. Give me one too. I wanted to give it to Renar, but he caught me by the elbow and took a bite out of my hand. Are you hungry? I let him take another bite and reached for the plate of slices. Holding it with one hand, I fed us with the other, and Renar was still half lying on my lap. Hungry and tired. Why did you run away? I choked at the insolence, vengefully shoving almost a whole pie into his mouth. Really, why? Everyone here was so loving and protective of me, I replied. His eyes glittered, and he chewed to answer, but I shoved another piece of ham into his mouth and continued, you made it clear that you wanted to get rid of me, first this ridiculous trial, then your silence and your refusal to exercise your pardon. You even told the goddess that you didn't need me. I don't really understand what this is all about. I'm sure you have someone else to sit on your lap, for that matter. I tried to pull out of his embrace, but I was unsuccessful. At the trial, I wondered how far they would go. The high judge had long questioned me with his verdicts, but I didn't have enough to dislodge him. So you helped me again, like you did with the conspiracy. Alina, if you hadn't disappeared, I would have explained everything to you. Instead, I spent another week or so agonizing with you. Serves you right. It's a shame you could believe I'd do such a thing. My eyes widened in outrage, and I forgot to take a bite out of the piece of cheese I had already brought to my mouth. After you called me ugly, said you didn't mind if something happened to me, put a nasty subjugation spell on me, yelled at me several times when your friends tried to kill me because your mistress almost killed me? And I'm not talking about all the humiliation that happened along the way. You were good too, sticking a dagger in me, embarrassing me in front of my subjects, crossing me and bullying me. I was angry. You treated me with no respect. It's hard for me to respect a woman who's willing to sell her body and soul for a favor. His words felt like a slap, and resentment stirred in my soul. My mom's life and my niece's health were at stake. I had agreed to participate in the contest, not to marry, and I sincerely thought that I would easily fall apart at the first stages if I didn't like my potential spouse. When it turned out not to be the case, I freaked out. I refused to make a commitment, even though we had fulfilled our obligations in full. I bit my lip and fell silent, then looked at him with a new look. Let's say. Tell me what it looked like from your side. I was having a rough day, and the council was getting really hard to deal with. When I found out so many girls had died, I was furious. I was unwittingly complicit in their murder. They convinced me until the last minute that the portal was safe for potential brides, and all the calculations pointed to that. When I saw you, you didn't look so good, blue, red hair, pale eyes. And I was even angrier that I'd have to share a bed with a girl like that. I used to like tall brunettes, and this one. Anyway, I got a little hot, but I'd be okay with it if you were quiet and obedient. Renard drew me to him and stroked my cheek. Even if I'm ugly, that doesn't give you the right to humiliate me. I wanted to push him away, but he gently stopped the attempt. I don't think you're ugly, and to be honest, I don't know what came over me. You're bright and unusual, and you can be seen in any crowd. You have a beautiful voice, mesmerizing and powerful. And a lot of other things, but it took me a while to see them all. And then I was walking into that room to see a woman who sold out for money, favors, my status, and who doesn't care what kind of man I am, but I have to reckon with her and have a family. Selling out for favors is bad because I don't care what kind of person you are. Met you and refused to marry you because I didn't like you as a person, also bad. I don't keep my word. Don't you think that's a bit contradictory? I do, Renard smiled, and I'll tell you more. After I rejected you in front of the goddess, I regretted it almost immediately. My stubbornness and rejection of what was imposed went beyond all reasonable limits. I must be the first fool in the world to say something like that. I don't want to be a pawn in the gods' games, Alina, it always hurts. But in this situation, I should have dealt with it first. When you disappeared, I had time to think about it. And what did you come up with? I'm trying to figure out who you are to me. Why? Because you're becoming more and more important to me every day. I'm drawn to you with an incredible force. I feel good and safe in your company. And you're not afraid of my fire. I don't have to break myself and hold myself back around you. I'm attracted to you, too, and it pisses me off terribly, because I'm still hurt by the way you treated me. And a few words won't make up for actions, Mr. Ambidextrous. I pushed his hand away and moved to the far edge of the couch. Let's say you did, then what? You broke the contract, my applause, you were able to get what you wanted and not owe anyone anything for it. What's your plan next, Alina? You have no family, no money, not even any magic. Marriage is the only way for you, and given the fact that you're my date, it's to marry me. The goddess gave me the chance to break that bond. She said that I would be a true match for the one I would love and the one who would love me back, she said quietly. Perhaps there are men in this world who will not refuse a true mate, and perhaps one of them I can recognize and love. Renard folded his arms across his chest and narrowed his eyes. Oh, is that so? And you've already broken that bond? Have you started looking for another fiancé? I didn't break the bond because there were no instructions. I didn't have time at first, and then I didn't have the time. As for the search for a fiancé, it hasn't been successful so far. But suddenly it turned out that I'm not so ugly, at least except for you, no one turned their nose up at me. So I'm not giving up hope. I've been looking for you all over the empire, worrying about your safety, and you've gone on the hunt for your fiancé and gotten to the magistrate. Do you like mages? Renard growled, his fingertips glowing. I don't see why I have to answer to you. What are you to me? Father, brother? Fiancé. I'm your fiancé. The fire was already spreading to his hands, his anger clearly growing stronger. Well, you're not happy about it, so let's end this farce and break the engagement. As you can see, the status of Empress and the right to give birth to your child and then quietly die of poison in a couple of years, I do not like it. And what do you care about, using the magic of my world for the good of your family and not keeping your promise? What promise? The goddess of justice herself recognized that it was you who broke the treaty. You didn't even have a guard on my side. I had Hashel assigned to you. And where was he when those Minhotep saboteurs were killing me? He was distracted. What do you want from me? There was no contest. I've almost died 4 times already by messing with you, including when I miraculously walked through a portal. And there's no end to it. If I remain your fiancé, I won't live to see the wedding. You can't keep me safe. But outside the palace, you were safe, and no one made an attempt on your life? He crossed his arms over his chest. Touché. I looked at him indignantly, but I couldn't lie or admit that he was right. It wasn't any safer, and the robbers on the road were no better than the Minhotep attackers. Sensing my hesitation, Renard arched an eyebrow sarcastically, waiting for an answer. It's not safe outside the palace either, but you have the illusion of freedom of choice. Outside the palace, your life and your pretty face are worth absolutely nothing. You don't know how to defend yourself, you don't know the laws and realities of our world, you can't provide for yourself. And now the question, Alina, and I advise you to think very hard about the answer. If your only chance for a happy and free life is marriage, how am I worse than any other option? He said the last words quietly, but his voice sent shivers down my spine, and a clammy fear settled in my chest. He sat across from me in a tense pose, angry and hurt, tired of searching and worrying about me, waiting to see if I'd reject him or not. Biting my lip, I lowered my eyes to my hands. He'd rejected me in front of the goddess. I could do the same. I could throw hurtful words in his face that anyone was better than him, and proudly retire to sleep under the roof of his house. I can hurt him, I can point out his faults, I can laugh at his contradictory desire to be called my fiancé, I can hurt him. But what would that say about me? What will I accomplish? And what do I want to accomplish? To even the score between us? Prove to myself that I'm capable of hurting him? Renard. This is so hard. All I've done here is humiliate myself and try to fight it. I'm tired. I'm not a warrior or an iron lady, I'm tired of fighting you and trying to prove I'm worthy of respect. And I found it easier to start over with someone else than to build something on the ashes with you. It hurt like hell when I ran away, and I thought you. A tear sprang from my eyes, and I sobbed pathetically, unable to finish the sentence. His hot arms wrapped around my shoulders, and I didn't even realize he was there, pulling me against his chest. I know you forget that I feel everything you feel. And now, too, he stroked my hair gently, and then he sat me on his lap and pulled me into a tight hug. I'll try to be wiser and not hurt you anymore. I'm not really used to thinking about someone else's feelings, and I think feeling your emotions is a lesson or punishment for hurting other women too often. When I looked up, my eyes filled with tears, I was confronted with his gaze, which was so clearly filled with tenderness and guilt. I wrapped my arms around his neck and pressed my face into his strong shoulder. Promise me that you won't take advantage of me again and that you'll share your plans for me. I will. Promise that no matter what the situation looks like, you'll talk to me before you jump to conclusions. To give you a chance to mess with my head? Renar choked and coughed. Why would I want to give you noodles? It's food. Well, we have an expression that means to mislead, to deceive. To conjure up a blue mist? I don't know, you know best. I was almost completely calm in his arms, warm, cozy, and serene, as if no storms and thunderstorms were threatening me now. The feeling of safety and security was new, untried. And somehow I got comfortable on his chest, and then I told him all about my adventures of the last few days. The passage about the robbers obviously didn't please him, but he kept his sarcasm to himself, even praised me sparingly for my self-defense. Are you tired? Yes, but I have to check on Janina and Castle, he must be scared here alone. Then let's go check on them, and I'll take you to bed. I didn't like the idea of parting with him, because I felt so warm and good in the ring of his strong arms. Renar smiled and whispered temptingly in my ear, or I'll sleep next to you, because after all, the palace is dangerous, and it's my duty to protect you. Haschel has shamefully failed, and I can't trust anyone else with my treasure. Not even Arkai? Especially Arkai. Or I won't be able to sleep wondering if you're his treasure now or not. He likes redheads, you see. His hot breath tickled and embarrassed me, sending goosebumps in a triumphant march down my back. At least someone. I snorted in my ear and bit my lobe sensuously. I don't like redheads, but I like you. I haven't made up my mind about you yet. Are you in love or are you in love? It's my turn to snort. I haven't decided whether to chase you off with a slipper or leave you guarding on the mat. I'm warm and comfy, I'm guarding you in bed. You're hot and probably taking up a lot of space. You could, of course, let you under the covers of the bed to warm up while I bathe. Let's do that. You come out of the bathroom naked, wet and cold, and I'll warm you up. You're dreaming, you're drooling, don't slip on it. I've got an honorable wedding to save. I promise not to claim your honor. Not yet. Just to warm you up. Come on, ambidextrous calorifier, let's go make sure Cass is okay. We walked to Castle's quarters holding hands. It was silly and childish, but at the same time so sweet and right that a warm pleasure poured over my chest, and a smile against my will tried to slip across my lips and lurk in my eyes. Renar looked unperturbed, but he could tell from the slight stroking of his palm and the fleeting glance that the stern emperor was quite content with his life, and even the stubborn vertical wrinkle between his eyebrows had straightened and almost disappeared. The reverent trust that had sprouted in our relationship was fragile, weightless, and we would both have to work hard to strengthen it, to establish that bond, but a beginning had been made. We both silently experienced this event, each in our own way, but close to each other. Chapter 5. Castle was pecking his nose in his chambers. It took me a few minutes to tuck him in and cover him well with a blanket. The fireplace in his room burned brightly and provided plenty of heat. Judging by the number of empty plates on the table, the food-addled boy would be happy to sleep through tomorrow, fed and comforted by my arrival. A little embarrassed by Renar's presence, I kissed him on the forehead, stroked his cheek, and tucked the blanket in like my mother always did. Renar watched me curiously, but he didn't comment, just silently closed the door behind us and pulled me toward my quarters. What, you won't even say a single barb? Why? I can sense the tenderness you have for him. It pleases me. You do? Of course it does. You'll be a good mother. I always wanted a big family. 10 kids, I think. Or 12. Stunned, I froze in the middle of the hallway. The contract said 2 boys were enough.
Yeah.
It's too bad you broke it, the obnoxious guy winked at me. Look, you are now 20, in our world you can safely give birth to 60, as Majikadi less than 150 will not live, so if every 2 years, that's 20 children. The emperor smiled grimly. It's rare for mages to have children. They probably don't try hard enough, but don't worry, you and I won't make that mistake. We'll try every night. I haven't decided whether to marry you or not. Maybe I'll marry RK. I hear he likes redheads. That you haven't made up your mind is nothing, as long as I've made up my mind. One more joke like that and before we're married, he'll go to a garrison so dull and godforsaken it's not even on the map. He's an insufferable jealous man. At your service, Renard gave me a graceful bow, then wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled me to him. Let's get you to bed. What about Janina? Sherry Tun will call us if we are needed. I can see that the need for my presence was dire, I said sarcastically. Exactly. The Emperor needed him and Sherry Tun as an obedient subject, provided. Memorize and learn. Why? Sherry Tun is doing just fine as it is. Also true. You'll have other duties. I've been thinking that 20 children is not enough. I think we should have 30. Why not 40? You're right, sweetie, you're right. Let's make it 40, I'll only support it. He rubbed his nose against my ear, which again gave me goosebumps. We'll use numerals, right? I can't handle 40 names anyway. The body weakened by childbirth is hardly capable of such a feat. Why? We'll make them suits with their names embroidered on them. And serial numbers. And birth dates, so there's no confusion. It's a deal. Renard pulled me into my old chambers, where the fire burned welcomingly and fresh flowers were everywhere. Dinner was waiting on the table in the living room under a napkin, and the room itself seemed to have grown cozier during my absence. Thank you for seeing me off. Good night. Go take a bath, my dusty berry. I expected him to kiss me, but instead he just hugged me and then pushed me toward the bathroom. I really wanted to bathe. After all the worries of the night before, the long day, and the tearful evening, I was tired, and the thought of a hot bath was incredibly tempting. Once inside, I called for my bag, pulled out my bathing gear, and washed myself with relish. A new, fluffy beige robe and several shirts of the finest smooth lace were waiting for me in the bathroom. Apparently, this time they wanted to let me know that my presence was welcome and expected. I washed my hair, towel-dried it hastily, and got ready for bed. I put on the prettiest shirt I could find, wrapped myself in the robe, and went into the bedroom only to freeze on the threshold. You're such a pussy. Renard crawled out from under the covers and stood before me in his underwear. It looked more like family underwear than anything else. I'd always thought they were impossible to look sexy in, but I was sorely mistaken. My ambidextrous man was mind-blowingly handsome. Tall, broad-shouldered and long-legged, he looked like he'd been cut out of a women's magazine or a poster. On the one hand, no dice, and on the other, developed plates of pectoral muscles, a relief stomach, strong arms, and the trained body of a man who was used to daily exertion, not just pumping biceps in the gym 3 times a week. His whole figure reeked of power and concentration. What are you doing here? I whispered in an alien voice. I could say, of course, that it was hoarse from passion, but in fact only women with bronchitis talk with such a whistle, and it was 0.0 erotic. I told you I'd keep you safe. Personally. And I won't molest you. But I'll go to the bathroom, and it's the only one here. Pushing me away from the doorway, my athletically built guard went to the bathroom and hummed there in the most prosaic way. Thank him for that, or I wouldn't have regained consciousness and would have stood as a statue of myself in the passage. I took off my robe and snuck under the blanket, snuggling into the warm spot Renard had left for me. There was only one problem. With his usual directness, he'd chosen a place in the middle of the bed, not a particular half of it, as was customary for people who slept together. Accordingly, I was lying in the middle, unable to leave the heated place. I was distracted from the dilemma of crawling and freezing or lying down and being embarrassed by the appearance of Renard, damp from bathing. His presence made the bed seem smaller, the ceilings lower, and the spacious bedroom shrunk to the size of a den. Driven by the hospitable temperature of my room, he scurried into the treacherous embrace of the cold bed and tried to snuggle against my warm side. No, 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 what are you doing? The protected object must be under constant control within sight or physical contact in case of its absence. So I'm within sight. And I sleep with my eyes closed, the ambidextrous replied defiantly, and pressed against me, enclosing me in a ring of hot arms. He even threw his leg over me for good measure. Are you guarding me from an external threat or to keep me from running away? I'm combining the pleasant with the very pleasant. I also keep you warm and make sure there's no competition. I nearly froze to death the first night, and you didn't seem too concerned about my comfort. I was young and made the mistakes of my youth. That was a month ago. A mortal can't define the limits of his youth, he said, his face so serious that I laughed. All right, mortal, go to sleep. And remember that you promised not to molest me. And you remember you didn't promise me any of that. No, you've got some nerve. What a hot, strong, muscular, good-smelling jerk. And all at my disposal. Rolling that thought across my completely empty hemispheres, I fidgeted a bit, getting comfortable. I realized belatedly that I wasn't wearing any underwear at all, only a shirt, and it was as useful as an umbrella against mosquitoes, no protection from below. Just where there was a hot and hard man's thigh, impudently wedged practically between my midriff and giving me both pleasure and discomfort. His right hand was on my stomach, and his left was stretched out and slipped under my neck, allowing me to lie comfortably on the pillow on one side, and marking his presence on the other. A traitorous warmth spread across my lower abdomen, and I started to sigh, thinking that I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight, as the warmth spread throughout my body, made my eyelids heavy, the thoughts left in my empty head clumsy, and I fell into a languid sleep with undeniable erotic overtones. I dreamed, of course, of Renard, naked and belly dancing for me in one little manisto. I could feel my cheeks flushing even in my sleep, but I couldn't wake up, so I lounged in the lingering fog of my lecherous imagination. I finally snapped back to reality at dawn, when the sky outside my window turned gray, and the thin puffy clouds turned various shades of crimson and orange. Thinking back to yesterday, I had to admit that I capitulated to the shamefully quick and ignominious, instantly believing in his explanation. I didn't even make a decent scandal. Common sense also woke up and said that I wanted to believe him so badly that it didn't even matter what he said. In spite of everything, I slept not just fine, but amazingly. My body was full of energy and fantasies of a certain kind. Renard was sniffling softly against my head, and I was lying there, leaning back against him in a ring of heavy arms. One of his hands was holding my breasts, and the thin fabric of my shirt didn't interfere with that. I turned around and nestled against his chest, planted my foot on his thigh, and fell silent. It felt desperately, unbelievably good, and I even dozed off again, sinking into the pre-dawn softness. The next time I woke up, I heard the door slam in the living room, took inventory of the body parts scattered across the bed, and realized with a bit of pleasure that Renard was still here, holding me with his left arm. Who closed the door, then? I jumped up, tangled in my blanket and limbs, startled my night guard, and stared in horror at Sally's huge, rapturous eyes. The maid's lips were twitching slightly, her eyes were the size of 2 saucers, and her hands held a tray of breakfast, judging by the single mug, for one person. Sunny morning, Sally. Bring the second breakfast and keep in mind that from now on, breakfast must be for 2. The maid nodded, took a breath of air and barked, her eyes full of triumph at the emperor. Sunny morning, your majesty. Any other requests or orders? Yes, tell my valet to bring a few sets of my clothes and linens here. Sally, if anyone finds out that the emperor is guarding me personally at night, I will kick your ears and get another maid. Is that understood? I shifted my eyebrows menacingly, but I'm afraid I failed to put a fierce expression on my crimson face. Sally didn't seem to be penetrating either. The chamberlain and Mr. Marin may speak, Renard added. Mr. Sherryton sent for Mrs. Alina. Good, bring the second breakfast and clothes, and tell Shara we'll be there soon. Where are they expecting us? In Mr. Dvelsordes' guest quarters. It's 1 floor down, 3rd door from the stairs on the right. Thank you. Run. Sally flew out of my chambers with a new gossip, and I buried my face in Renard's chest with a groan. Sunny morning, Barry. I didn't expect you to be so charmingly embarrassed. Good morning, Reiner. If you tease, you'll get a pillow on your forehead. Does my lovely fiancé prefer to make threats early in the morning? Look, ambidextrous, you may be used to it, but I've never woken up in the company and scrutiny of a stranger. If you want, I'll have breakfast left in the living room and the bedroom door kept closed. I see you've got your skis set up here. If I'm getting my meaning and intonation right, yes. By the way, you're glowing. What? Your hair is glowing. And you're glowing from the inside out. You know, I'm an idiot for not realizing that's the only way my date could be. Fiery and beautiful. That's what you get for handling objections. I opened my mouth to protest his unauthorized entry into my territory, but with a single compliment, he shattered my resolve to argue, and then sealed it with a passionate kiss. I had to hand it to the magic tooth powder. It felt nice and fresh in my mouth, even after the night before, and there was nothing to stop us from caressing each other. Kissing in bed with a half-naked man was not just pleasant, but mind-blowingly good. For a while I forgot who I was and where I was, surrendering myself to his demanding lips and hot tongue. My hands were on their own, exploring the territory of possible occupation: velvety smooth brown skin, firm muscles, broad, strong shoulders. His hands, by the way, behaved more chastely, settling on the back of my neck and my lower back, only pressing me tighter against the hard male body. The reappearance of Sally came as a huge surprise to me, like snow in December to the utility workers. In my mind, I'd anticipated something like this, but I hadn't expected it to happen to me now. Renard let her go with a gesture, pulled a table over to the bed, put both trays of breakfast there, and even managed to move me closer to the food. I was in a state of erotic prostration, keeping my eyes on his movements and swooning sweetly, noting every line. How can it be that yesterday morning I was wildly offended by this traitor, and today I shiver at every touch? Apparently, while I was standing in line for big breasts, pride and intelligence were given away somewhere else, otherwise I can't explain what is happening to me. My guard, by the way, wasted no time and ate with a huge appetite, not forgetting to feed me with the most tidbits. Renard? How's your reserve? Full, as is yours, though you went to sleep almost empty. I was going to offer to replenish it a little, but I was afraid I'd scare you off. It worked out even better, at least you can conjure without worry, it'll come back up in the night. I don't know how to conjure. I've only recently learned to sense my reserve. We'll look into it, no wonder you're having a hard time. Char said that in your world, even he could barely do anything. The portal had to be broken through from this side. Are you really going to spend the night with me now? I slipped into a low whisper of excitement, but he understood me. If you don't chase me away, he playfully poked me in the side with his head, pulling me down onto the bed and hovering over me. I've never felt as good as I did tonight. I don't know how I'm going to make it through the first day of summer. Why do you have to make it to the first day of summer? That's almost 3 months. I like your spirit, my berry, but only the first days of the season are good for weddings. We only get married 4 days a year. What about the guests? If they need to go to more than one wedding at a time? A wedding is a big celebration, so they try to celebrate them together, inviting as many people as possible. And the gifts? Gifts can be given by the gods. But only once, I involuntarily touched the earrings given by the goddess. So we're not going to have gifts? The goddess of life, aka the goddess of fertility and love, is usually in charge of such things. She didn't give you anything? I don't think so. Well, then there's nothing to worry about. I still can't understand why you have gods who come to call, take sacrifices, give gifts, but no one worships them. It's strange. What's strange about it? It is and it is. The sun rises every day in the morning, it makes life possible, but no one thinks to worship it. What's the point of worshipping something that's part of the world? And how then to choose what is not worth worshipping? Should we thank the sea for its gifts, magic for its fruits, the air for the ability to breathe? The gods are just a part of the world, like everything else. And they're best kept away from, take my word for it. And in our world, people worshipped the sun and the sea. And gods are still worshipped today. It's a strange world you've got here, he hummed diplomatically. My thoughts returned to what I'd been about to ask. Can't we do this before the wedding? I tried to look relaxed and indifferent, but I was still blushing and embarrassed. No, my dear, the Empress must be innocent, otherwise the ritual can't be completed. So yes, it will have to wait. But don't be upset, he whispered in my ear in the most shameless way, I'll find something to please you. Renard bit my nipple lightly to confirm his intentions to please me, sending a wave of pleasure and goosebumps through my body. You promised you wouldn't molest me. Yesterday I did, yesterday I didn't, he said. Promise not to hit on me this month. I can promise not to hit on you today. 2 months. 1 week. 3 months. You don't bargain properly, you know that? Okay, I'll take a month, no more. I had to take it. I think I cheaped out, but the moment was already gone. Then get off me. I'm not even touching you. He raised himself up on his elbows, and there were indeed a couple of miserable centimeters of space between us. They're waiting for us, go get dressed. You haven't finished your meal. I can finish it myself. That's a moot point. Besides, I have to make sure you don't choke. And that no one takes your food. It's just you. Well, I'll make sure I don't take it away. With a laugh, I shoved him in the shoulder and went about my breakfast, glancing at him occasionally. He was quick to assemble in his military way, stopping only to snatch a particularly appetizing morsel from my fingers with his lips. I resisted as much as I could, but the small weight category did not allow me to resist neither a fat sandwich with salted fish, nor 3 cheese canapes with a piece of some exotic fruit, nor half of a muffin with jelly. All right, ambidextrous, stop it. I was outraged. I was the one who made sure you didn't get your food stolen. Without me you would have gone hungry. But no thanks, he pretended to be indignant. Here's your gratitude. I shoved another bun with jam into his mouth so that the sweet filling smeared all over his face. An attempt on the Emperor's life. With his face smeared with jam, he caught up with me across the bed, forcing me to lick off all the jam, finish my bun, and beg for mercy. We kissed for a while longer, and if it hadn't been for Renard, I wouldn't have gotten out of bed. My dress tonight was incredibly frivolous and tight, with open shoulders and a narrow skirt flared to the knee. The overexertion was bad for Hoveniza, so the color was bright and defiantly scarlet. The ring on my finger was quite shiny, too. Apparently, I wasn't the only one sucking on other people's reserves at night. Renard tried to ask me to change, but I wryly pointed out that no other dresses had been provided for me, which made the Emperor embarrassed and perhaps even ashamed. But that's not certain. I still wondered if he had any shame or conscience at all, or if it had all been burned away in the magical fire.